Hello everyone and welcome back again. And today we are taking on mass media theory. Now take a moment and think about this. When you scroll your phone, watch television or read the news, is it just information you're consuming or is the very medium shaping the way you think? That's the big question behind mass media theory. It studies how both new and traditional media influence culture, society, and even our own sense of identity. Pause here and note this down. Marshall McLuhan's famous line, "The medium is the message," was asked in exam. What does it mean? Simply that the form of media, whether it's print, television, or social media, matters just as much as the content. The medium itself determines how the message is shaped, received, and circulated. Unlike older models where media power seemed centralized, think of a few big newspapers or radio stations. Today's world is decentralized. Media now flows through countless channels, platforms, and sources. This fragmentation of communication was asked in exam, and it explains why our experience of media today feels both chaotic and multi-directional. Let's decode a few key frameworks. Framing effects show us how media doesn't just tell us what to think about, it tells us how to think about it. Agenda setting emphasizes how repeated coverage prioritizes certain issues over others, shaping public debate, and priming highlights how exposure to specific topics influences our judgment and decisions later. From a symbolic interactionist perspective, mass media doesn't just deliver information, it actively builds meaning, shaping how we see ourselves and others. John Story's Inventing Popular Culture, From Folklore to Globalization, asked in exam, reminds us that popular culture itself is created and reinvented through media circulation. Now, here's something crucial for exam prep: the three foundational media theories. First, cultivation theory. This says that repeated exposure to media slowly cultivates our beliefs. Watch enough television dramas with certain gender roles and you start absorbing those roles subconsciously. Second, the spiral of silence theory. Can you recall when this was developed around World War I? It argues that people, fearing isolation, often stay silent if they feel their views are in the minority. Elizabeth Noel Neumann outlined 5 key elements: threat of isolation, fear of isolation, a quasi-statistical sense of majority opinion, willingness to speak, and the tendency to remain silent. And finally, the earliest of them all, the hypodermic needle theory. Developed in the 1920s and 30s, it imagined media as a direct injection of messages into passive audiences, producing uniform effects. It was later critiqued as simplistic, but it reflects early anxieties about propaganda and mass persuasion. So, what's the bigger picture here? Mass media is never neutral. It doesn't just reflect society, it shapes it. From cultivating subtle attitudes to silencing minority voices to constructing popular culture, media theory shows us that communication technologies are powerful tools in forming social life, discourse, and identity. Take a look around you: your phone, your clothes, the food you eat, even the shows you watch on streaming platforms. Almost everything in daily life today carries the imprint of globalization. At its core, globalization means the transmission of ideas, values, and cultural products across borders, intensifying ties between societies, economies, and individuals. Pause here and note this: globalization is not just about goods and trade, it's about culture. It allows people to participate in relationships that stretch beyond their nation or region. But it's not entirely new. Its roots go back to colonization, exploration, and cultural domination. Today, the internet, global media, and international travel accelerate these flows like never before. As John's story shows in Inventing Popular Culture, From Folklore to Globalization, asked in exam, popular culture becomes the vehicle for this interconnectedness. Whether it's music, film, or fashion, global products shape identities while also becoming sites of resistance. Similarly, Steve Mentz in Shipwreck Modernity, Ecologies of Globalization, 1550 to 1719, asked in exam, reminds us that globalization has early modern origins. Back then, maritime trade, exploration, and ecological exchanges linked regions and reshaped entire cultural systems. Now here's the tension. Globalization brings integration but also sparks conflict. On the one hand, it leads to homogenization, spreading Western or Americanized lifestyles worldwide. On the other hand, it heightens local identities, fueling counter-globalization movements that resist cultural erasure. Think of it this way, your favorite pop song might be global, but your regional language cinema still thrives alongside it. And that brings us to a key concept, glocalization. Pause here and note this. It was asked in exam. The term was popularized by Ronald Robertson, and it explains that globalization is never just one way. Instead, it's a negotiation. The global meets the local, and together they create hybrid forms. Can you recall the famous corporate phrase linked to this? Yes, think globally, act locally. Japanese companies, for example, expanded abroad using this principle, adapting their products to local context while still operating globally. The idea is simple. What works worldwide must also resonate with local culture. As a theory, glocalization challenges the binary of globalization versus localization. It shows that cultural flows always blend the universal with the particular. So instead of erasing difference, globalization often reshapes it, producing hybrid forms of identity, culture, and even politics. Imagine walking through a mall in Tokyo, Mumbai, and New York and noticing the same fast food chains, the same movies, the same brand logos everywhere. That's cultural homogenization in action. David E. O'Connor defines it as the process by which local cultures are transformed or absorbed by a dominant outside culture. And pause here, because this is often described as the most widely discussed hallmark of global culture. On the surface, homogenization might look like it's creating a shared universal culture. But critics see something else, cultural imperialism and neo-colonialism. The dominance of Western, especially American capitalist culture, has given us terms you've probably heard: McDonaldization, Coca-colonization, Americanization, and Westernization. These describe how consumerism, fast food, and Hollywood spread a uniform culture while erasing indigenous traditions and local identities. Now here's where theorists step in. Ronald Robertson emphasized the tension between global standardization and local particularities. Zygmunt Bauman connected homogenization to the fluid uncertainties of liquid modernity. The key point to remember: homogenization isn't neutral, it's tied to inequality and the persistence of Western hegemony. But in contrast, let's shift to multiculturalism. Instead of flattening diversity, multiculturalism insists on protecting and respecting cultural differences. It's both a political principle and a cultural ideal. Rather than forcing everyone to assimilate into one dominant identity, it celebrates contributions from minority communities, offers legal protections, and in some cases grants autonomous rights of governance. An important example, and this was asked in exam. The Canadian Multiculturalism Act of 1988 formally recognized Canada's cultural diversity and embedded multicultural values into national law. It's a landmark case of institutionalized multiculturalism. In practice, multiculturalism acknowledges that modern democracies are made up of many worldviews, traditions, and practices. It challenges exclusion and seeks equitable recognition. The goal is to balance unity with diversity, creating a society where difference doesn't just survive, but is actively respected and embraced. Let's begin with Ronald Robertson, a pioneering voice in globalization studies. Born in 1938 and passing away in 2022, Robertson held positions at the University of Pittsburgh and later at the University of Aberdeen. He is remembered for pushing sociology beyond borders and showing how global processes shape culture, identity, and institutions. Pause here and note this. He gave us the influential idea of glocalization, asked in exam. This term reminds us that globalization doesn't erase local cultures. Instead, global and local forces blend, creating new hybrid forms. Think of how fast food chains adapt menus to different countries' global reach but local flavor. Robertson's idea broke the myth that globalization is only about homogenization. Instead, it's an interplay between universality and particularity, and this continues to shape cultural and postcolonial studies today. Now shift to John Richard Urry, born in 1946 and passing in 2016, a British sociologist and professor at Lancaster University. Urry transformed how we think about tourism and mobility. His famous book, The Tourist Gaze, became a landmark in sociology, asked in exam. Here, he showed that tourism is not just travel, it is structured by power, representation, and consumption. Tourists don't simply see places, they gaze at them through cultural lenses that construct certain sites as desirable, exotic, or authentic. Beyond tourism, Urry explored mobility studies, environmental sociology, and the move from organized capitalism to globalized economies. His work linked culture, society, and environment, making him one of the central figures in reimagining how people, goods, and ideas move in the modern world. And finally, let's sail into the work of Steve Mentz, an American professor of English at St. John's University in New York and a leading voice in what is now called the Blue Humanities. Pause here and note this. This concept was asked in exam. Mentz explores humanity's relationship with oceans and maritime cultures, blending literature, history, and ecology. His book Shipwreck Modernity, published in 2015, looks at how shipwreck narratives reveal early modern fears of ecological disaster and global entanglement. He has also written At the Bottom of Shakespeare's Ocean, Break Up the Anthropocene Ocean, An Introduction to the Blue Humanities, and Sailing Without Ahab. Beyond his books, he connects with wider audiences through his blog, The Bookfish, and curatorial projects like the Folger Library's Lost at Sea exhibition. His central message is powerful. The ocean is not just a backdrop to human history, but an active force shaping our ecological and cultural futures. Together, Robertson, Urry, and Mentz remind us that theory is not abstract. It's about the flows of culture, the ways we travel, and even the waters that surround us. And each of them has been asked in exam, so keep these anchors sharp for your preparation. Let's step into some of the big global thinkers who shaped how we understand the 21st century. Each one comes from a different field: journalism, political science, and atmospheric chemistry. But all three push us to ask the same question: how do humans live together on a rapidly changing planet? We begin with Thomas L. Friedman, the three-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, best known for his long-running foreign affairs column in the New York Times. Since the 1980s, Friedman has covered war in Lebanon, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, global terrorism, and above all, globalization. His book From Beirut to Jerusalem in 1989 won the National Book Award, but his most famous idea came in The World is Flat, published in 2005. Here, Friedman argued that technology and globalization had flattened the world, creating a global level playing field. Pause here and note this: it became a defining metaphor for the early digital age. While widely read, Friedman faced criticism too, especially for his support of the Iraq War and his sometimes overly optimistic take on globalization. Still, his works like The Lexis and the Olive Tree and Hot, Flat and Crowded keep shaping debates on democracy, environment, and America's role in the world. Now shift to Francis Fukuyama, born in 1952, whose famous book The End of History and the Last Man came out in 1992, asked in exam. Fukuyama argued that with the collapse of the Cold War, liberal democracy and free market capitalism might represent the final form of government. Imagine that the claim that ideological struggle was over. This sparked global debate. Critics said history never really ends, and indeed later world events seemed to prove them right. But Fukuyama's book remains one of the most discussed works in political theory. In Trust, Social Virtues and the Creation of Prosperity from 1995, he stressed that economics cannot be separated from culture and social values. Once linked with neoconservatism, Fukuyama later distanced himself, especially after the Iraq War. His writings continue to influence how we think about democracy, governance, and the tension between universal political models and local traditions. Finally, let's look at Paul Crutzen, the Dutch atmospheric chemist born in 1933 and winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1995. His research on the ozone layer reshaped environmental science and led directly to the Montreal Protocol. But Crutzen is even more widely remembered for coining the word Anthropocene, asked in exam, a proposed epoch where human activity itself becomes the dominant force shaping Earth's climate and ecosystems. He also warned about the dangers of nuclear winter and large-scale atmospheric pollution, reminding the world how fragile the planet really is. Through both his science and his concepts, Crutzen gave us new ways of imagining humanity's relationship with the Earth. So, whether it's Friedman with the flat world of globalization, Fukuyama with the end of history, or Crutzen with the Anthropocene, these thinkers remind us of how ideas travel across journalism, politics, and science. And yes, several of these key works have been asked in exam. So make sure you keep them at your fingertips. When we think of globalization, we often imagine it as a single smooth process spreading across the world. But Arjun Appadurai, one of the most influential Indian-American anthropologists, taught us to see it differently as messy, overlapping, and fragmented. Born in 1949, Appadurai taught at the University of Chicago and later became director of the Center for Cities and Globalization at Yale. He was elected a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1997, a recognition of his immense contribution to cultural theory. Make a note this, his major works include Worship and Conflict Under Colonial Rule from 1981, Disjuncture and Difference in the Global Cultural Economy from 1990, Modernity at Large from 1996, asked in exam, and Fear of Small Numbers from 2006. Each of these texts shaped how we understand culture in the age of globalization. Now here's the key part. Disjuncture and Difference in the Global Cultural Economy introduced his famous framework of the 5 scapes, asked in exam. These scapes explain how globalization actually unfolds. Ethnoscapes for the movement of people across borders. Mediascapes for the images and stories that shape our imaginations. Technoscapes for the flow of technologies across the globe. Financescapes for the worldwide movement of money and capital. Ideoscapes for the spread of ideas and ideologies. Can you recall why this is important? Because instead of treating globalization as a single story, Appadurai shows us that it is many stories at once, each flowing in different directions, at different speeds, sometimes connecting and sometimes clashing. Another concept closely linked to his name is the social imaginary. For Appadurai, imagination is not just a private act but a social practice. Societies live through shared images, aspirations, and expectations about the future. This means globalization does not just change economies. It changes how people dream, how they see themselves, and how they envision their place in the world. But there's a catch. Globalization also brings conflict, inequality, and insecurity, even as it opens up new cultural possibilities. That tension between opportunity and instability is at the core of Appadurai's thinking. So, when you think of Arjun Appadurai, remember the 5 scapes, the social imaginary, and modernity at large, all of which make him one of the most important voices in globalization studies, and of course, several of these have been asked in exam. Now, we begin with Walter D. Mignolo, born in 1941 in Argentina, a leading voice in post-colonial and decolonial thought. At Duke University, he developed ideas like modernity, coloniality, border thinking, and pluriversality. Mignolo argues that Eurocentric ways of knowing dominate the world, silencing alternative voices. His concept of border thinking calls for knowledge from the margins, from those historically excluded by colonialism. He also co-edits Worlds and Knowledges, otherwise a platform for global decolonial scholarship. His key message? To move beyond Eurocentrism, we must embrace plural ways of imagining the world. Pause here. Our next thinker is Saskia Sassen, an American-Dutch sociologist at Columbia University. She's most famous for coining the term global city. Think of places like New York, London, or Tokyo cities, where finance, migration, and technology converge, reshaping not just urban life, but global networks. Her work shows how globalization weakens the power of nation-states, producing denationalization and transnational flows. By analyzing migration, capital, and information systems, Sassen gave us one of the most powerful frameworks for understanding globalization today. Now shift gears to the digital age. Tiziana Terranova, born in 1967, is an Italian scholar and activist known for her concept of digital labor. She argues that online users create economic value simply by browsing, liking, sharing, or posting, but without recognition or pay. In her book, Network Culture, Politics for the Information Age, she explores how digital collaboration and information flows reshape governance and everyday life. Terranova shows us that the internet is not just communication, it's work, politics, and power woven into culture. Finally, let's look at William Kymlicka. Born in 1962, a Canadian philosopher whose work transformed debates on multiculturalism and minority rights. He distinguishes between immigrant groups who need cultural recognition within existing systems and national minorities like the Quebecois in Canada or the Maori in New Zealand who have their own history of self-rule and institutions. For Kymlicka, these groups deserve special forms of autonomy and protection. His work also extends into animal ethics, co-authored with his wife Sue Donaldson, stressing justice beyond human society. Imagine living in a society where people of different languages, religions, and traditions all share the same public space. How can such a society stay united without silencing cultural differences? This is the question Bhikhu Parekh, a British political theorist born in 1935, dedicated his life to answering. Parekh is internationally recognized for his work on multicultural citizenship and the politics of cultural pluralism, and yes, this has been asked in exam. He served as professor of political theory at the University of Hull from 1982 to 2001, later moving to the University of Westminster, where he taught until 2009. Beyond academia, he also played a public role as a Labour Party member of the House of Lords and as president of the Academy of Social Sciences from 2003 to 2008. Pause here and note this down. Parekh's most influential book is Rethinking Multiculturalism, Cultural Diversity and Political Theory, published in 2002, asked in exam. In it, he argues that multiculturalism is not just a fact of modern life, but a political necessity. Democracies must find ways to balance unity with cultural difference, ensuring that diverse groups are respected without losing social cohesion. Earlier in his career, Parekh also wrote Marxist Theory of Ideology in 1982, which reflects his interest in ideology and social critique. But his lasting legacy is in showing how multiculturalism is more than tolerance. It requires recognition, dialogue, and justice. So when you think of Bhikhu Parekh, remember this. He gave us the political tools to rethink diversity, not as a threat to democracy, but as its foundation. And because his ideas on multicultural citizenship and cultural pluralism have been repeatedly asked in exam, they are vital anchors for your preparation. That wraps up Chapter 8, Mass Media Theory Unlocked. We've covered the key thinkers, concepts and debates with videos, notes, PYQs and last-minute revision material ready for you. All classroom and diary notes are also available in PDF format. So don't wait, download the app now and keep your preparation one step ahead.